Sean.
We are back, and Giuseppe's still here.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm
Jonathan's
here.
still here.
Yeah.
If he still has energy after a long
No.
presentation, we thank you for staying on.
Yes, thank you, and tons of information, lots of tips, lots of tricks, lots of tools, lots of things to for people to embrace there. And we want to go back to the beginning of your conversation for the most part, and talk about the importance of storytelling, right? You made the points that cybersecurity can be boring, that executives and everyone else, for that matter, have a hard time paying attention, getting interested in it, understanding the importance of it. And this is a topic near and dear to our hearts, Marco and I, storytelling, right? It's all about understanding your audience and connecting with them in a way that they feel and absorb what the message is that's being given to them. So maybe you can spend a little more time talking about how you do that. We'll start with the executive level. I know you gave a tip to order your slides in reverse.
I'm gonna use that, by the way.
That's right.
Starting today.
Start with one and end with one. Yeah. I like the throw them off kilter with 0 as well. But what are some of the things you do to really tell that story? What are the elements? How does that conversation look?
Sure. The actual scenario here is that this is the one I talked about is only the first story that I tell. There are a few more I go after, but the reason is, as much as we talk about awareness, the biggest problem that we face in execution is finding the right sponsor and the budget. And as I presented in the Japanese organization, IT budgets are not abundant at all in most companies too, I'm sure. So we need to get this extra spending approved by senior levels sponsorship. So I do this at many places to figure out which executive will basically align with our thinking and our thoughts. And while I pitch, I'm looking at each guy and trying to figure out whose mind my talk is resonating, and what can he do, and how he can help.
Is that a champion, and is that something that works well in Japanese culture?
Yeah, it does. Now, it's not just resonating in him, but does he have the ability to do this too? So you got to do a lot of background checking, and there's a lot of intelligence that goes into this off and on to figure out which guy you want and which guy you can't work with, even though they may be very much in tune with what you're saying, because the execution is the key. So I do this, and I look at maybe 5-6 rounds of these kind of talk as it gets better. And the best case scenario is that after maybe 5-6 meetings and discussions, they will come to me and say, by the way, Giuseppe, I think we should be doing this, and this, and that. I thought about it over the weekend, but it's actually what I told him the week before, but he is now repeating what I said to me. And I have to say, wow, that's a great idea. But when they are parroting what you're saying, they really now are thinking, right? And they're believing it. So it takes a lot of effort to find the right guy to get there. And lots of times I don't get there because I can't find the people who is willing to stand up to do these kind of things. But once I find out, then I work with him on more, I would say, tactical and convincing scenario as to what are the arguments and why this is good for the company. And I try to outline exactly his scenario that he can pitch to his peers Then I go in with him typically in a board meeting, and I do the preface so that I massage the brains of the people listening first and create an atmosphere that when he stands after me, it's something that soaks into this guy's mind, says, oh yeah, I think we should be doing that. So we work together. So that's the best case scenario that I try to aim for. It's not easy, but it's a long process of typically 3 months to 6 months. And I've done this with about 30, 40 corporations in Japan in the last 2 years.
It sounds very much one of those processes we do in advertising. First of all, you have the gatekeeper, which is the one you want to talk to. They can bring your idea in. And then maybe you do 2, 3, maybe more proposal. And usually they get the one in the middle. Like they don't go with the more creative. They don't go with the one more conservative. But what I'm curious, and I want to touch to the Japanese culture, where you presented a few misconceptions during your presentation. And because of that culture, did you find that some message may resonate more from a psychological perspective? I mean, some culture may react better to fear, some other to metaphors, some others to, the money they're going to lose or the money that they're going to make. Is there like a more of a, like that culture message metaphor that works more for the Japanese culture and for other culture? Because I'm sure you've been experiencing the US and other countries. That works with cybersecurity in this case.
It's, I think you know this, but it's more consensus building, and it's not it's individualistic approach or individualistic initiative. So you have to build, it's always, you struggle to make sure nobody objects to it. It doesn't matter if they don't approve it positively, but as long as they don't object, it will pass. Okay, so the key is you have to find the degree of their, I would say, passion, and try to work with, it's like the coronavirus. You want to lower the temperature to body temperature, okay? And anybody with a high temperature is considered bad in the Japanese society in a way, because you stand out. So you cannot make somebody a champion of the champions and exonerate him and all that and give him a spotlight all the time, because then the envyism and everything starts coming.
Got it.
So you have to stay what you call average temperature all the time, except maybe a little higher, but that's fine because that's the guy who started talking about it. But
it's a delicate balance.
It is. Yeah, it is. And everybody has different buttons, so you don't want to push the bad buttons. You just don't want to push any buttons. Then no explosion occurs.
Right.
Avoid the explosion. Now, another thing that we'll stick with the executive level conversation for a moment, and then maybe we'll branch out from there. But toward the end of the presentation, you touched on the U.S. versus Japan model of executive conversation.
Right.
And the 5 areas were ownership, approach, justification, perspective, and execution. And I'd like to spend a little more time there and maybe peel back the onion, as they say, on some more of the differences. And maybe a good way to start this would be, is there one myth of how Japanese business approaches that 5-step process differently than most might think?
I think it has to do a lot with risk awareness or risk classification of cybersecurity today, because the executives are not aware that this is a risk issue and the risk impact is. They all know it's a bad thing. I have nobody who will say, cybersecurity is a good thing. They know it can be bad, especially Monday morning, because they play golf on the weekend with other executives and come back and say, what's our risk exposure? So they do that. Okay, but the key is it's not in the same category as other things. And let me give you an example. one of my discussions, I'll talk about, Mr. Executive, do you have fire insurance? Yeah, we do. Do you have automobile insurance for your company cars? Yeah, we do. You have all these insurances, okay? But do you have...
And probably policies as well, right?
Yeah, they do.
For how to use the cars. And
Exactly. But you don't have one for cybersecurity. But the accidents happen. And you know that goes, yeah, you know, I know that. I know we will get attacked, okay? But you don't have any insurance. So what's the problem? And then I'll say, okay, if you invest in security, that's like an insurance, but much better. And he'll say, why? Because when you have fire, you have to have the fire and the damage first to get paid by the insurance company. With cybersecurity, you don't have to have an incident because you already invested in it. So would you want to have an accident first and then get paid? Or do you want to have no accident? Which one is better? So that's kind of the argument I deal with them. But the awareness of risk and how it is treated is relatively not something in their mindset until you talk to them about it.
Is that no clear ownership to pull on one of those 5 strings? Is because you also said that it was difficult to find who in the room would be your champion and help you see things through. So I'm getting the sense that maybe the fear of the unknown, nobody wants to embrace it, or nobody wants to get fired over it if something bad happens. What's that culture like?
Well, in many other U.S. boards, there are typically somebody in the board or close to it in owning security, cybersecurity, whether that may be CISO or the COO or legal department, or the many different sort of senior executive positions that own it. In Japan, there aren't anybody who is explicitly security ownership. Somebody may be managing a security group. That doesn't mean they own it. And the closest one that more likely to do is the compliance group, because it's coming from compliance. It's not the same, but it is somebody who understands better about cybersecurity exposure. But the compliance guys are more looking at laying down the policy and following the rules. That's what they care about. Security is only one piece of that. But if I were to go and sell this to, the first place I go is take temperature of the compliance executive and see where he is. And sometimes he is the right guy because he has to, that's his responsibility and he lives up to it. Some people don't have a high so-called ownership of security within compliance. But one more thing I want to add is this is something more of a market issue, but in Japan, there are no shareholder lawsuits. Meaning, I would say there is, but they are very rare. The shareholders do not sue the ownership of the companies for mishandling. Okay? Whereas in US, you have a breach, and the next day you have 10 lawsuits on your table. Okay, and you have, as a board member or a senior executive, you've got your shirt tail being covered, being pulled because you are liable and you didn't do the job. Okay, so there is a strong definition of who owns and what are the penalties if you don't do the job. So it's easier for them to approve big investments in security because otherwise they will be sued. In Japan, this doesn't happen. Okay, all they have to do is,
Which one is, you talked about there is an eye opener that when you throw information at them, you find that key that is really open the door. Like, as you say, you come back from playing golf and you walk in and like, hey, that stick, that resonate with my conversation.
Right.
And so if the fear of being sued, which is what drive the one in the United States or many other places in the world, the fear of being sued after a GDPR breach of regulation. So what is that makes the cybersecurity decision happen in Japan, given that, as you said, there's really not a culture of it, which in a way does shock me quite a bit, because I always think about Japan as this perfect, everything is clean, the train, nobody talk. I mean, we're very responsible, but cybersecurity, no. So what makes tick eventually? Or what do you think will make tick?
What will make it tick is basically the atmosphere that forces that to happen, not really particular, driver. There isn't any, and this is why security business is quite difficult in Japan, because there isn't a logical reason why a company should do security. So you have to build the air around them that they have to do it. And then one guy have to stand up and say, let me propose the solution. And I would somehow, with the blessing of you guys, I would be happy to lead it, but it's a group decision, everybody. But I will be the one to head it. But don't poke me in the back afterwards, because this is a group decision. That's the kind of the dynamics that we have to build. And it's the bad part of the consensus-based, culture that causes the problem.
Jonathan, I see you want to talk. Come on, you have something you want to say. Come on.
Well, I've invested into Japan for years and run 2 companies that are in Tokyo, and we face this all the time. We may have what seems to be a rational thing for somebody to do, and I've had this conversation with you, Giuseppe, in Tokyo, is you mentioned to me in conversation, you said reference-based culture. And that's very fascinating, because I use that a lot. I take that from you, and I try to attribute to that conversation when I talk to people is it really makes sense, because you have to read the air, but you have to create this environment that people in a group consensus space will then take the lead and then be able to communicate effectively to the respective parties. And no one's going to take that lead, because the first question they'll ask is, who else is doing this in my particular industry? And if the answer is nobody is, or maybe one company is, or just a few companies, then the question is, why isn't everybody doing this? And so inevitably you get into this position, this cyclical kind of issue. It doesn't mean nobody's doing it. There are leading companies that are investing heavily in cybersecurity technology and security awareness, but that's a very small minority. I'm curious to know more, Giuseppe, about who is investing in this and who is completely left open and vulnerable, because I was reading a report a couple of years ago that was produced by the Ministry of Communication in Japan, who said there were 128 billion cyber attack attempts in the country against critical industry. And if you think about that, that's like, what, 500 million every day against various different aspects of society, both at critical infrastructure, individuals, governments, small, medium-sized businesses. And they know this, and this has been going on for years. So what is missing with being able to take this information? This is a government institution that has reported on this, so it's not as if they're not aware of it. So how do we then translate that into an effective approach to talking to company executive, whether they're small businesses or even large-scale Japanese corporations?
Ideally, you want the decision to be based on why it is good for them to do this. This because they have a risk and they have to mitigate the risk. I mean, that's what you would think is the logical reason. But in most cases, they will look at their peers, the competitors, and say, okay, if they are doing, we should do it. And it's the herd mentality. Now, the trick here is we use that for business a lot, but it's not a really good thing, because they really themselves don't accept it. It's just because your peer is doing, and so it must be a good thing. So it's not I would say the appropriate way to make decision, but in business it makes sense, because you get a business closed that way too.
As we were talking about the executive level, the business decision, I'm also curious to know the regular people, the everyday user, the employees, which is also the everyday user. Go back to the family. I mean, everybody has a phone, IoT. You wrote several examples of that.
Mm.
What is their approach to it? Are they aware? Are they being educated? Maybe are the school doing something about it? Are there like public opinion campaign going on? Or what is happening in the executive level is also happening in society, like where we don't care, we're not going to do it?
Oh, I see. In general, the people on the ground are aware of the risk and the problems that are happening. They're certainly not ignoring it. Unfortunately, at their level, they can't make any major decisions and changes in direction or strategic, move. So, so that's where it stops actually, because they give up and
Right.
they just have to live their daily life. What are the structural issue is, this is more a little bit traditional in Japan, but many IT tasks are performed by IT subsidiaries of the companies which had spun out 10, 20 years ago. And, company says, okay, you are my IT department, you guys go out and become your own business and try to make money by yourself too while serving us, kind of thing. Okay, it was a good way to farm them out.
Yeah.
Okay, it hasn't really done well, but that's the case. Well, these people are more likely the ones that are very, I would say, stagnant. They don't want to enhance and increase their work. So I would go to senior executives, get their buy-in. Then the IT subs managers come up and say, "Oh, we're already doing that. I don't want to. Why do we have to spend the money? We are okay." Because they don't want to do any more work. They're happy with what they're doing. It's more effort for them. And that is typically a way that many major deals go down, because we forgot to get these guys motivated and on our side before we go to the senior executives. So these kind of dynamics are also under the surface.
Yeah, it's a perennial challenge in Japan, and which is one of the reasons why we've been hosting our security awareness, our SIA security awareness in Japan, and bringing that out to the world. Is, as Giuseppe mentioned, having conversations like that, inviting executives and people outside of cybersecurity is really important. Most Japanese, and I think outside of Japan's executives, board members, investor groups don't typically have a background in cybersecurity, may not have the experience and understanding and appreciation. And I would say most Japanese board members definitely don't have cybersecurity knowledge, right, Giuseppe? That provides a fundamental challenge in communicating, which means that we have to communicate effectively, but also, and they may not truly appreciate the vast terrain of cybersecurity threats and the vulnerabilities that are out there, the nation state actors, the threat landscape, the APTs, all these things that are happening. So
one thing that I would, Fujitsu-san talked yesterday, and a few other government officials who are taking cybersecurity initiative is important, because the basic problem besides the executives is basically the shortage of cybersecurity specialists. As I said, 200,000 short, right? Well, so if you look at the history of how these people come about, most of them come out in the US from Defense Department or government. So there are tons of these people in Washington, D.C. So if the government doesn't take initiative and train and nurture these high-level professionals in their own organization, it doesn't flow into the commercial sector at all. And this is the big missing link in nurturing the cybersecurity professionals in Japan. And if the government is weak, then there is no resource, because you don't get this expertise. I mean, you need guys from CIA, FBI, NSA to be heading some of these, so-called intelligence and efforts. Then people learn from that, but you don't have that coming in Japan. So there is no sourcing from the government. This is a big problem of so-called building the professional community here.
Yeah.
I'm glad you automatically transitioned to that. I was gonna poke you a bit to connect it back to Dr. Fujisue's conversation about the government's stance on cybersecurity. And maybe one final question as we wrap up here, kind of looking at the bigger picture and the full ecosystem. We can wrap industrial control and critical infrastructure into that, commercial and government, but the whole supply chain. What's the state of the supply chain cybersecurity?
It's extremely low. Manufacturing is probably one of the least, I would say, managed from cybersecurity point of view, especially in the OT side. You know, IT is like any other company, it's so-so, you know, but the OT side is extremely so-called abandoned from the cybersecurity initiative inside the company. And then that comes into play, especially you look at major manufacturers, the tier one parent companies spend a lot of money in IT, but then tier twos are less, and then tier threes are on their own. But if you look at cybersecurity supply chain, all these guys are connected. And the bad guys don't go to the big company who spends the money. They go to the third tier, break it in and move upwards. Or they go to their Chinese manufacturing plant and move up the ladder, right? So they don't think that way. And that is a missing link. And it has to do with, I would always look at supply chain on a verticalization, not on horizontal approach, where you have to cover all your vertical supply chain tiers first before you have a cybersecurity initiative, not just your own parent company. And that's the weakness here.
Yeah, makes sense. And I know Marco loves it when I ask one more question.
Oh yeah, it's his signature. So here you go.
It is my signature. So you led off with compliance leads the charge in commercial. Is compliance the answer? Regulatory compliance,
yes.
Government compliance, the answer to the supply chain?
If the government doesn't enforce compliance with penalty, it's not going to do. This is a common symptom that government tries not to, get into the businesses from their policies. But in security, it's like the coronavirus. If you don't do it with all together, it migrates from one place to the other, right? So the government has to take initiative. So, for example, if you are doing a government contract, the companies in the contract should be all certified. Otherwise, you're penalized, kind of thing. But that doesn't exist. So if there aren't, strong government policies shelter in place, that doesn't happen here. It is strongly asked to stay at home is the policy here. Today, which doesn't matter because people go out, because it's a nice day outside. They go outside. So Japan is very soft in these kind of, pushing down the policies. And there are things like cybersecurity, which should be more strict than ever, but they don't. And this COVID is a good example.
Well,
Very example. I think the three of us are in LA, Los Angeles County, surrounded by two other beachside counties that opened up the beaches around us.
Yeah, and even when the beach was not open 2 days ago, there's still a lot of people on PCH. I can guarantee that.
Yes.
So I think, Jonathan, thank you for the opportunity for this conversation. It was a really good, in-depth understanding, or at least beginning to understand the culture of Japan from a business perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective. Of course, we're looking forward to come and have this conversation there in Japan. And to start tonight, I will read the Momotaro, the Peach Boy story, so that I'll get ready.
Thank you.
I read it to my daughter. She's probably listening right now. Momotaro-san, Momotaro-san. Okoshi ni tsuketa kimidango.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to make myself familiar with that. But really, Giuseppe, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Jonathan.
Yes.
And Sean, I'll see you
Absolute pleasure,
later.
Giuseppe.
And
Thank you.
We'll be back on
Jonathan,
tomorrow with another one.
Keep up the good
All
work.
right.
Thank
We
you,
have
guys.
2 more. All right, thank you. We'll be back in 2-3 minutes. Stay tuned. We got 2 sessions left, so we're going to
that's
take a
right.
few minute break. Oh, I still go. I go for another 2-3 hours.
I'm going to go walk the dog, okay?
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Giuseppe.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right,
Stay
bye.
tuned.
Bye.
Bye.
The future is now.